Hi, and welcome along to AFTV. We got a very special interview today. We've got Ben Jacobs, transfer expert, sport broadcaster. He's been breaking a lot of news regarding transfers throughout the summer. So I thought I'd get you on for a little Transfer Daily special. And Ben, welcome along, first of all, to AFTV.
Great to be here, and I'm sure that Arsenal fans are really excited by the window so far.
Yeah. Well, but by the way, first of all, explain that I can see that blue Leicester shirt in the background. Is that where your loyalties lie?
It is. I mean, we're obviously very neutral as journalists. If anything, in terms of what I do work-wise, I give Leicester a bit more stick to overcompensate. But I was born in Leicester, and those, of course, that followed the Invincibles season will remember that Leicester, final game of the season, they
Yeah.
nearly spoiled the unbeaten run. But thankfully for the Invincibles, they were able to overcome falling behind and get through that season. But Leicester nearly
No
made
chance. No chance. Well, anyway, let's get stuck into transfers. First of all, I'm starting off with the news that's broken today that William Saliba has signed a brand new contract at Arsenal. Now, Saliba had been linked, with moves away from Arsenal. I mean, his contract is up at the end of next season. There was a bit of a worry about this one because he played so well last season that Arsenal might have problems in tying him down, but they've got their man.
Yeah, I think that there was only a problem, to my understanding, comparative to the other deals. And that's quite important to stress, because if you're looking at the renewals, for example, of Bukayo Saka or Gabriel Martinelli, Aaron Ramsdale, then they were more routine. But that doesn't mean that Arsenal ever lost confidence that William Saliba would sign a new deal. And Saliba kind of had all of the cards because he'd been thrown into the team after the loan spell at Marseille, and then wasn't ever present up until his injury. So obviously Arsenal have known all season that Saliba is integral, and he has signed, and it may well even be official by the time people watch this, but certainly over the course of the next week or so, I would imagine, a deal until originally June 2027. But there is an extra year that takes him to the club until 2028. That is optional, though. And this was delayed compared to some of the other renewals simply because of the player coming back from Marseille. So being on a loan meant that at that point, not only had he enjoyed his time in France, and Marseille would have loved to try and sign him permanently, but there was no real connection with the club in terms of pathways. So Saliba returned, and Mikel Arteta actually backed off, to my understanding, in the first week or so. He wanted the player to return to pre-season and just watch and see how he responded and integrated with the rest of the team. And Arteta was really impressed. And then they had a conversation, and Arteta made it absolutely clear to Saliba how highly rated he was, and that from the club's point of view, they simply didn't want to sell or even loan. And then he earned his opportunity. He started the season, and the rest is history, really. So this was then about rewarding Saliba. And I suppose you could argue that had a contract been made early, then the wage would have been lower. But every single game that Saliba played and was outstanding for Arsenal, the more leverage he had, and even being injured to an extent, allowed him to almost showcase, in a bad way from Arsenal's point of view, but helpful to the player, how important he was. Because as soon as he wasn't in the side, unfortunately, Arsenal conceded a few more goals and wobbled down the stretch. So Saliba had all of the cards here, but Arsenal and Saliba always wanted to extend. So it was tougher because of the wages, and it was quite a big jump in terms of Saliba's demands, and also due to the fact that there is still interest even now for the long term. But at the point when Saliba hadn't signed, it was possible for this summer. There were clubs like PSG, for example, that were looking at the player, and he only grew up 6 kilometers, I think, from the center of Paris. So this was one Arsenal were desperate to get done. They've got it over the line, and everyone will obviously focus on the summer business and the 200 million plus worth of spending. But we shouldn't forget that over the course of the last year or so, Arsenal have renewed big names as well, which are equally, if not more important to their long-term project. And Saliba's one of them.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's been fantastic that he signed a new deal, and it is like that old Arsene Wenger saying he used to have like a new signing. It is because he is that good, and we had to make sure we held on to him. And Arsenal, I mean, like you just alluded to there, in the transfer window so far, I've been really, you know, right at the forefront of it. Now we're expecting the announcements on Declan Rice, on Urian Timber. They've already signed Kai Havertz. And there's a lot of people been asking, how have Arsenal been able to do, where have they got the money from, is what a lot of people have been saying. But these are three really good signings, aren't they?
Three really, really good signings. And I'm not going to say them in full, but if we look at a certain team inferior to Arsenal in terms of last season's league table, beginning, of course, with either a T or an S, they got Champions League football 2 seasons back in terms of their qualification. And then it allowed Daniel Levy heading into last season to inject about 100 million into the club. So Champions League football is one reason why Arsenal can ultimately spend more. And if you get that with regularity, you can budget for it, because not that many teams budgeting season on season for Champions League football, which might sound ridiculous, but you need to know you're getting it every season to change your model. So Brighton will not change their model because they've got Europe once. You need it 4 or 5 times to actually budget for it. You're aiming for it, you're expecting it from a football point of view, especially if you're Arsenal, but you're not budgeting for it, because otherwise you're over projecting, and the financial projections are always quite pessimistic, especially in light of financial fair play. And as a result, it's probably only Manchester City now that are actually budgeting season on season for Champions League football. It used to be Liverpool, it used to be Chelsea, but they've not got it heading into this season. So they're not budgeting for it. Manchester United, Arsenal, etc. You can't until you have it season on season on season. So getting it now for Arsenal is a step forwards, and that's part of the spending. And then with financial fair play, it works in cycles. So even though you also have the Premier League's profit and sustainability, which is about your annual outlay, from Arsenal's perspective, they've been disciplined and they're choosing to be aggressive in the market now, because first of all, they want to make sure that they challenge for the title and that they get one over Manchester City. But perhaps more importantly, from a purely budgetary point of view, because it sounds much more underwhelming if we're talking on the football side, but from a budgetary point of view, main aim is just to make sure they consolidate in that top 4, because then they can keep spending, not necessarily at 200 plus million every single window, but they'll have that flexibility. And in an inflated market, you need it at the moment. So I think that Arsenal have done 2 things really well. One is the renewals that we've touched upon, because they've tied down young talent for the future. And the second thing is they've made sure they've got business done early. So whereas with Mykhailo Mudryk, there was kind of outcry because everybody knew Mudryk wanted Arsenal. It looked inevitable at one point, but they didn't get Mudryk, and he was ultimately their top January target. So then flash forwards and everyone's seeing the same 100 odd million and Rice and top target. And then when Manchester City came in, I think Arsenal fans to some extent wondered if it would follow the same path. So for Arsenal to have got Rice in subject to the medical, and also Timber and Havertz, it's early business, and it makes a statement, because not only is there a long part of the window now to resolve outgoings and maybe bring in 1 or 2 more, but Mikel Arteta can really head into pre-season with stability. And that's what it's all about at this stage of the window. You want your players in for the main part of your pre-season and often your tour away, because that's where you build the chemistry. You then assess that chemistry and work out what else you need based on outgoings, based on form, based on injuries, and later in the window, based on how the first couple of games of the season start. So I think what we see in these signings is a pattern. Look at Havertz. It's a good deal all round. Fee could rise to 67.5 million to my understanding. And he's a hybrid. So we may not see him play in the same role as at Chelsea. In fact, I don't think we will. He's far more likely to be behind Gabriel Jesus rather than leading the line. And if he can get going, still has that sky high potential to not only score, but input to games and connect the entire front line. And that's what Mikel Arteta sees. With Urian Timber, I think that we're very likely going to see a balance to the side, and he can play inverted, Zinchenko can play inverted. So suddenly Arsenal have got depth, versatility, options, and a little bit of symmetry. And
So you think you'll be a right back then, if you're saying?
Well, I think he can play in that position. It's not necessarily the definitive answer, but I think that it gives that ability for Mikel Arteta to again be versatile. And this is the sort of interesting aspect to what Arteta does with players like Zinchenko. We know that he can play inverted. We know that he can go left back. We know he can go left midfield. And ultimately, Jurrien Timber has that versatility and that ability to be utilized in different systems. So everyone looks at the starting formation and people will put players in different places. But for game management, I think that's the thing you'll see, where Timber's encouraged on the ball, off the ball, 1-0 up, 1-0 down, to move into these different positions. And the fact that he can play in an inverted position is obviously very useful, because if Arteta wants to utilize that, he does have the balance and the symmetry. And at 22, he has that kind of hybrid aspect to his game, but also that high ceiling to develop. And guess what? Havertz, as I've just said, falls into the same category. And then with Rice, I think the real advantage is just that he's a modern central or defensive midfielder. And modern is the key word, because we get obsessed now with what we call players, especially in midfield. They can be central midfielders, defensive midfielders, number 6s, number 8s, attacking midfielders that go wide, false strikers, number 10s, etc. And it doesn't really mean anything when they're modern. Because if you look at Declan Rice throughout his career, he hasn't, except in the last 2 seasons, really pushed on with his attacking qualities. But in the last 2 seasons, that's what he's added to his game. And this is the appeal for Arteta. So Rice historically has been about tenacity, discipline, ball winning, safer passing, and ultimately very intelligent game management to protect what's behind him and link up what's in front of him, but in a much more conservative way. If you look at the last 2 seasons, he scored 10 goals. I think it's 5 in each season, and the progressive passing has massively improved, and he's really started to push forwards, to chip in from an attacking point of view, to pass with more directness. And it's that progressive passing in particular that's of huge appeal to Arteta, because again, you've got a connection. So if you're wide fullbacks or inverted players or whatever we're calling them in an Arteta formation, if they're getting forwards and connecting and versatile and also able to cover, then if in midfield you've got seemingly a more defensive-minded midfielder that actually is increasingly attack-minded and progressive, and then you've got Havertz, who is going to be probably playing deeper than at Chelsea, but again, can get forwards and can switch positions and can lead the line. And then we all know about the Sakas and Martinellis of this world. Then Arsenal have just got so much rhythm and chemistry that I think it's going to be an exciting season ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely sounds exciting. What every what every Arsenal fan now is going to be saying is, who's next? Who's coming in? Yeah, listen, I know us only too well. That's what we're all on now. Great bit of business. Great to get these guys in early, pre-season and that. But who's coming in next? Who do you think Arsenal, what will be the next targets for the window? Because I guess this is the bulk of the business, but they will be on the lookout for, gems out there. They'll be on the lookout for bargains. They'll be on the lookout for maybe a couple of positions that maybe need cover.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that we'll see outgoings and a bit of quietness. And it's funny because when you do your business early, then there's so much time left in the window that fans say, why are we not working on someone else? Why are we not spending something else? And it's already an astonishing window. So I think we'll see a couple of key positions, in my opinion, and they'll ultimately be defined by outgoings first. So another midfielder is still possible. That's the first thing to say. And with Granit Xhaka heading towards Bayer Leverkusen, and that one is getting very close for just over 20 million. And if Thomas Partey goes as well, then midfield's a possibility. And we might see Arsenal, for example, pick up their pursuit of Romeo Lavia. There's a lot of buzz about Liverpool at the moment, but as I reported a few weeks back, Arsenal are also very aware of Lavia. And I think that there's a deal there to be had. It's just a case of, if Arsenal enter the race and Liverpool are there, then Southampton are naturally going to be able to stick to their asking price, which is something around the 50 million mark. Whereas Arsenal, well aware of the deal, Liverpool as well, are thinking about the buyback clause for 2024, which is actually available only to Manchester City, but they're using that price as a yardstick. And they're basically saying it's 40 million. Why is it 50 million when you've got relegated and the player may very much want to move? So Arsenal are not advanced on Lavia at this point. It will ultimately be about outgoings first, but if Liverpool or another suitor progress that, then Arsenal will obviously have to decide if they want to enter that race or if they're confident that the Lavia situation will be resolved a little bit later in the window. So that's going to be one to watch. I know also in midfield, Arsenal fans have kind of created this catchy hashtag of Riceado, which is obviously Rice plus Caicedo. And we know about Arsenal's pursuit of Caicedo in January that was sadly, from their perspective, unsuccessful. They're not advancing at this point, and Chelsea are very much pushing. And Chelsea want to get in Caicedo before their US tour starts, which is ultimately only a few days away. So it's a case of seeing whether Chelsea get that one over the line and whether there's a twist. At the moment, it doesn't look like Arsenal are thinking about that. And if they do, then Brighton are going to turn around and say, we've got two suitors again. We want at least 80 million. And that means Arsenal's summer spending before the main bulk of pre-season starts is 300 million. So I think Lavia is more likely than Caicedo from Arsenal's point of view. But we do know that Arsenal have had a historical interest in Caicedo. And then I would also just keep an eye, again, could very well be defined by outgoings too, on the left-back situation. And Kieran Tierney's got a big decision to make ultimately because he's not getting the game time. Newcastle have had a historical interest, but they've been moving on Tino Livramento instead. And maybe they'll be able to agree a fee with Southampton. So there's a lot of talk about Arsenal's targets there too. And João Cancelo is certainly a player that Arsenal very much like. It's just a case of whether a deal is possible. And it's a compliment in many ways to Arsenal if Manchester City now don't want to do too much business with Arsenal because they suddenly see them as a direct rival. But Cancelo probably doesn't have a future at Manchester City. Doesn't look like Bayern are coming back in after the loan spell. So as a result of that, I think that it might provide an opportunity for somebody to come in. And that's naturally a fullback that Arsenal would really like because he's versatile. He's able to play fullback or wing back. And it would allow Arsenal another quality signing and a depth signing. So we'll wait and see on that one. I'm not aware that they've advanced with that particular target, but it could well be another priority position that they look at between now and when the window shuts.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is because they've done so well in getting their business done so early, now they're just gonna relax in a way and just take their time, identify what they need to identify, and basically be ready if the right signing becomes available.
Yeah, right signing, right value. And naturally, when you've spent as much as Arsenal have spent, you have to consider, can we afford? Do we want to afford? Because the financial fair play cycle, the UEFA one, and this is important, means that you could be top heavy in one window, but then if they need something in January or next summer, that's when the spend catches up on you. So Arsenal are not panicked if they spend 300 or 350 million as opposed to 250 million. They could find that extra money, but somewhere down the line in the cycle, they then may have to be conservative. It will also depend on outgoings, of course. So there's no panic. And I think a good example of that is another Arsenal-linked player in Jeremy Frimpong. And the interest is real. And Manchester United are tracking the player as well. And that's another wing-back who is versatile. But it's going to be difficult because of price there. And if Arsenal don't see value, do they desperately need, or will they just walk away? And I think that's another example of how Arsenal will still stay very disciplined in many ways. And, that I think is reasonably significant simply because if they are to move in that direction with Bayer Leverkusen, what are they going to be able to bring in terms of incomings to offset that? Because the incomings are kind of instant profit or outgoings, sorry, I should say. Outgoings are instant profit on the books. Yeah. So if you sell a player and there's no amortization left, then you can declare that immediately on the annual books, and then you're a little bit healthier financially speaking. So this is where For example, Balogun could be somebody worth watching, because we know that the player has had a breakthrough season with Rem, and on top of that has chosen the US men's national team and won the CONCACAF Nations League. So has said very openly, it's first team football or leave. There's no middle ground of a loan. So suddenly Arsenal might be able to pull in 30, 35 million for that kind of player if they can't find him the game time and don't want to integrate him into their team. And again, that might allow them to move a little bit more freely in the market.
Yeah, well, they've earned this flexibility, which is great. You spoke about Balogun there. There's like you said, there's going to be a lot of decisions to be made on a lot of outgoings from now till the end of the season. But the business they've done so far has been really great. Have you got any sort of left field player out there that maybe you think Arsenal may take a look at before the end of the window?
I think that left field wise, there's a couple of younger names that Arsenal have looked at. One is Alex Scott of Bristol City, who's a very highly rated midfielder. It's been more Wolves and Tottenham, to my understanding, that are pushing on that now, but they've certainly been tracking him, as you would expect for a top player with big potential. Price is also an issue with Bristol City as well. But I think that it's that kind of young player that Arsenal could come in the mix for. It was the same at my club with a player like Harvey Barnes. Arsenal took a look, much like they did, by the way, with Mason Mount before he ended up joining Manchester United, but not necessarily the priority position now that Arsenal will be looking to strengthen in. And these kind of players also have to understand where they would get the game time. So now that Havertz has arrived and will drop into midfield, obviously, if Mason Mount was still available, or James Maddison was still available, or Harvey Barnes, the first thing that they're going to be asking is, where on earth am I going to get any game time? And I think that with Mount and Arsenal, when they first inquired, he felt very early on, if he was going to leave Chelsea, that it would be Manchester United where he would get the game time. And this is ultimately why the player decided that he was going to move, and Arsenal very much backed out of that race. So we might see a few young surprises. I think the other name, perhaps not as much of a surprise, but certainly has been spoken about by Arsenal in the past, is Fresneda as well. I know that Barcelona are pushing on that one. I know that Dortmund have also had an interest as well. And that's, again, a good example. If we go back to January, when Arsenal were really more active on Fresneda, where was the game time? If you sign the 18-year-old, how is he going to be integrated? And maybe the last name that I think will be more Chelsea at this point, but has been looked at and has been on Arsenal's radar, is Gabri Veiga too, who is at Celta Vigo under Rafa Benitez. And PSG and Chelsea are the front runners, and Arsenal again, because they're well stocked, not moving now. But if you'd have asked me 3 months ago heading into the window, I'd have said that Arsenal could be quite seriously in that conversation as well. So what this tells you is that they're really planning for their future and a few windows ahead at the same time as doing this big spend. Everyone's focused on the big spend because it's Timber and it's Rice, and maybe it's going to be Lavia, and maybe it's going to be Cancelo or a player in that kind of position. But just keep an eye out as the window goes for somebody that's a little bit more under the radar and under the age of 21, 22, that could be someone that's for Arsenal's future rather than now. And that shows you that they're being astute and planning ahead. And obviously they've got a great record of having those young players that are able to break through. And maybe someone goes out on loan and then has a Saliba-like situation where in a season or two they come back and they become a first team starter. And that is when your recruitment model is ticking and everything is kind of going according to plan. When you send a loan player out, they come back, they come straight into the first team. We don't see it as often as you think, but Arsenal relatively strong at that. And let's see whether that's the same for, say, Levi Colwell at Chelsea. He comes back from Brighton. Does he start the first game of the season against Liverpool? That tells you that your loan system is working. That tells you that your talent ID is working. So Arsenal will kind of be looking for that kind of thing as well. And I still think they're in for a really active window, but it's outgoings first. And then no doubt they might bring in one or two more between now and when the window shuts.
Well, listen, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you very much for all your insights. It's been absolutely brilliant. Where can people find you if they want to read more and study more? I know they can find you obviously on Twitter. A lot of people follow you on Twitter for your transfer updates, but where else can they find you?
Yeah, it's funny because people sometimes see the window through Twitter, and I've been working with CBS in America. So obviously those in America will have seen me on screens or writing, but not necessarily those outside of America. I've actually left CBS this summer ahead of a new gig next season, which will be announced soon, but you can hear me on Sirius, on TalkSport as well, Premier League commentaries next season. And then writing wise, obviously I've done CBS previously, but I also have a column on Caught Offside and a new show with Fabrizio Romano and Angus Scott called The Debrief. So you can check that out also on the Caught Offside platforms too.
I like that because you said an announcement to come soon. So look, you know, I need to do a bit of ITK work now on Ben Jacobs to find out where he's going to be next.
Yeah, it's nothing as exciting as Arsenal transfers. It's a very similar gig, still
150 grand a week. Maybe.
I don't know. I was asking for double that. We'll wait and see what the final number is when the first paycheck hits.
You've got a release clause, I'm sure. Yeah,
yeah. And the other thing, by the way, I just wanted to say, because I think you're going to be involved and have been in the past, is SoccerX is another thing that's very dear to my heart. And that's coming to Miami in November, and I'll be a part of that. I'll be doing the conference circuit. Everyone else does wedding season, and my summer into winter is usually conference season. So you'll be hearing a lot of me, you'll be seeing a lot of me. And
I'm going to be there as well. So I look forward to we
I can't wait. We have to do another show. If I've not put off the Arsenal fans, we'll do a show live from Miami.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, thanks very much, Ben. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on today. Absolute
pleasure, and good luck to Arsenal ahead of the new season.
Thank you, and good luck to Leicester as well.
We need it.
Shop for AFTV merch at shop.aftv.co.uk. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat, and Twitch. We've got content for every platform, so check it out.